Welcome to Inside the IDB. This is a space where we open our doors to you and share a little bit about how is life at our organization. We want to take advantage of this space to strengthen awareness about the common barriers that underrepresented community face to reach leadership position and highlight the IDB's effort to proactively support them and continuously promote and foster inclusion within our teams. Today, we will be talking about mentoring and inclusion as key drivers in our employees' work towards the recoverment of Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Kayanna Parson Sinclair, Development Facilitation Consultant at the Caribbean Country Department, active member of the IDB's Afro-Descendant Alliance Group, and the moderator for today's conversation. I am now happy to introduce our three guests: Federico Galizia, our Chief Risk Officer; Rocio Medina, our Country Representative in Panama; and Ria Jordan, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisor. Through their stories, we will learn about Federico's perspective as a mentor and as a leader, and who have witnessed the professional growth of his mentees. Rocio, a former mentee, a country representative, a woman, a leader, Afro-Latina, who professional journey is worth to learn from, right? It is so vast. And Ria, that is also a former mentee and the main voice leading the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the corporate IDB. Before we start, I would like to encourage our audience to put in your question into the chat, and we will make sure to answer a few of them before we end this broadcast. So to get started and learn a little bit more about the importance of the IDB mentoring program in the career development of our talent, I would like to hear first from Rocio. How did your involvement as a mentee in the program contributed to your professional growth within the organization?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Kayanna, and it's great to be here with all of you today. Maybe just to start, just tell you a little bit about me. I'm Peruvian. I'm a lawyer. I've been at the bank getting close to 22 years now. I think I have very fortunate to be in different divisions of the bank. I've been in the public sector, I've been in the private sector, I've been in the headquarters, country offices. I've been country representative in Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and now in Panama. And I've been moving from the technical to managerial track as well. So different aspects and knowing the whole institution. And I would like to maybe highlight one issue which is very relevant to this talk is actually when I entered the bank as a junior professional. I mean, and when I was hired as a permanent staff, as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I was hired as an investment officer. So I mean, and I would like to highlight this because of the belief of my supervisor at the time in terms of the diversity of the skills. I mean, even though this kind of position is very typical for people who have MBAs, finance backgrounds, and just to put together the belief of the supervisor to put together the different skills from lawyers, finance, and different skills, I think it's very important and brings the best for bringing different solutions. And I think it's something that I would like to highlight. And also, as I mentioned, I mean, as part of the YP program, the junior professional, where I entered, at the time, the mentorship program was not in place. And I can tell you that for me was actually hard. I mean, looking for knowing now the mentor, being part of the mentorship program, being a mentee, a mentor for many years. I'm thinking retrospectively at that time, I wish I had that opportunity. I mean, how to navigate the institution when I entered the bank, I didn't know anyone. And not only in terms of networking, but only knowing, who can appreciate what are your skills and what are you the best place that you can also fit in the organization. So I really want to highlight that. And another important milestone for me in my career at the bank, and where I really appreciate the mentorship program, is when I moved from the technical track to the managerial track. And I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, I have a very technical background, and I've been working for many years at the bank. But when I was put in the position to go to the field to be a country representative at the time in Venezuela, I mean, it's how you feel how you moved from your comfort zone. I mean, how you normally you are afraid to fail. You normally, you don't know, it's uncertain. I mean, and in very technical, managing a very technical team, but to manage an office is different. And actually now, as a country rep, I have an office of around 100 people. So just to move that and have someone with experience to guide you, to see the pros and cons and the experience, especially to move first for other, at the time, I was very lucky having a great mentor to help me to navigate that. I think I would really highlight it and encourage, to be part of the mentorship, not only at the bank, but in general. I think, especially for women, I would say that's really also very important to navigate and escalate in any institution that you are.
Thank you, Rocio. Thank you for sharing your experience. Definitely, I would like to highlight what you mentioned about that. Your background or your career is like you're a liar, but right by career, but you were hired as an investment officer. So that's the important of a leader and of an organization to identify the diversity of skills that we can have. That maybe you have a specific background, but you bring to the table different types of skills that you can excel in a different position, and that probably they will never imagine about. And another thing is about the mentorship program that will help you navigate the institution. And not only that, but gain experience, and most importantly, to trust in yourself, to trust on your skills, and just not be afraid of coming out your comfort zone and taking on new roles, like how you did from a technical track to managerial. So thank you so much for sharing this. And moving on to Federico, which is important to mention. Federico was Rocio's and also Ria's mentor, so that's incredible. And in your position, Federico, as a mentor and as a leader, what do you think the IDB is doing well to promote leadership opportunity for underrepresented groups, and especially for Afro-descendants?
Thank you, Kayanna, for your kind words. It's really humbling to be here. I would say the IDB is doing a lot, and we have an incredible diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor coming up. We have a network of champions, such as Rocio, who goes over and beyond her role. And then we have a mentorship program where, rather than talking about the mentorship program at the bank, I just want to do a little bit of self-disclosure on what mentorship did for me in my development. I'm Italian. I came to the US in graduate school, where I had academic mentors who were really coaches. They were teaching me the skills. And it was not until I had my first executive management job as chief risk officer with the European Union that I really discovered what mentorship can do. And I had two mentors at the same time. One, my chief executive came from General Electric. It was a Jack Welch type of character, teaching me hard-nosed management and profit making. The other came from the European Commission. It was a lifetime civil servant, teaching me how to navigate a good bureaucracy and to make a bureaucracy a good bureaucracy. That had a huge influence that allowed me to come to the IDB, completely different environment in which I had, in a region where I had not worked before, much more prepared than I would have been. And then the IDB, I rediscovered mentorship, and I had three mentors, all three of them women, all three of them from the region, each of them bringing a different perspective to my growth. And frankly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my wife, who's Puerto Rican and teaches at Howard University, for opening a number of perspectives that I think helped me enter this dialogue today in a much more informed manner than I would have had as an Italian born 55 years ago in Europe.
Thank you, Federico. And definitely something important that you mentioned is, and the different mentors that you have had throughout your career. And that only brings to my mind that it's important how this type of spaces, programs like the mentorship programs, not only form the future leaders, but also the future mentors. How you was a mentee in a time and now you're a mentor, the same thing as Rocio and Ria. So I think that's the important, not only finding developing the skills of our talent, but also identifying those future leaders and those future mentors. So definitely thank you for sharing this experience. And now I would like to move to a question for Ria, because you're a great example of our diverse and also valuable talent here at the IDB. You have so many intersecting identities, Ria. You're a woman, a Caribbean, a Trinidadian. You have, and like you're an expert in HR, right? And you have held multiple positions within the IDB. So I would like to know, what will you say opened most doors for you?
Well, first I'd like to start by just recognizing how much opportunities like this, sit down and talk, gives you the opportunity to understand how you share experiences with colleagues who you might not have known previously. So listening to Rocio, listening to Federico. Well, with Rocio, one of the first things that struck me is that we are over 20 years in the organization. And as Rocio said, when we would have started, there was no mentorship program. And then, of course, from Federico, the importance of having somebody who really believes in you and supports you early on in your career. So when I started with the bank, as I mentioned, we didn't have a mentorship program. But what we did have was a peer-to-peer program, peer-to-peer learning program, which is a little bit ad hoc at the time. But because the people who I worked with believed in me, saw my talent, saw the opportunities that I could provide for building the IDB that they wanted at the time, they allowed me to come to Washington just for 6 weeks and to live in Washington and to work side by side with people who I was working with every day and I had never met. And so that was tremendously instrumental in opening doors for me and showing me how I could contribute to the development agenda at the time, right? Now, of course, years later, we have the mentorship program. And as you mentioned, Kayanna, I was mentored by Federico. And Federico, thank you for the kind words. And Federico was just one in many, or I shouldn't say just one, because he brought a different perspective for me. And each one of my mentors always brought different perspectives to me. But he was one of the people who certainly shaped my ability to see things differently and to move my career in different directions. One of the things that I want to highlight also, and why I like the IDB, is that the IDB is really focused on giving people these spaces, giving people these opportunities to collaborate and work together. And that's what the mentorship program is, because it's not just an opportunity to learn and to get new perspectives, but it's also an opportunity to network, because in conversations that you would have with your mentor, they mention names, people you should talk to, people you should network with, people you meet, not just within the organization, which is important, but also in other sister organizations, you know? So that helps you to have that reach and to build your knowledge set. And so all of that creates an environment where you become a more rounded professional and are able to really grow in your career in a very distinctive way. Back to you, Kayanna.
Thank you, Ria. And something that you mentioned, and it's very interesting, is how organizations need to evolve, right? Something that started as a peer-to-peer learning now has become a well-established program that is very recognized, and everyone is like looking forward to be part of the mentorship program. And as you mentioned, you not only network within the IDB, you expand your network even to other organizations, because you're like kind of the network of your mentor become your network too. So that's really important. And I think also inviting and seeing how the organization, the IDB, gives spaces for people, for everyone to collaborate and work, and just continue fostering this diverse environment focused on working together and collaborating. So thank you so much for sharing that. And at this point, I would like to highlight something before I ask another question to Federico, is that since 2012, the IDB has been working in terms of a framework that places diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront of our action. And for that, Federico, my question will be, because based on your experience as Chief Risk Officer, your unit recently has begun to report on the emerging risk of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do you think are the benefits of having a diverse representation in decision-making teams, especially in the context of Latin America and the Caribbean road to economic recovery?
So thank you very much. We are in technical discussions with our board of directors on the potential vulnerabilities and impacts that diversity, equity, and inclusion risk can have for the bank. But I don't want to make this a technical risk management panel. I just want to point to a basic paradox. We often refer to minorities in a context when in a broader global context, they may even be majorities. And the disconnect you have there is that if an organization doesn't reflect properly a majority, like the incredible representation and richness we have in our region, let's just, because of the topic of the day, focusing on Afro-descendants, who are, I understand, 20% of the population in the region. If our organization doesn't reflect that proportion, we're going to disconnect from our core client base. So it's both the risk of not providing what the region needs, because we all suffer from our own biases. And I will always start from what I know, which is Italy and Europe, and try to replicate it in the region. And that may or may not be useful. So unless I am counterbalanced by people that represent the region more broadly, we're not going to be able to achieve our mission as effectively and as powerfully as we can. And I think I would love it if the bank looked like this panel. Obviously including me, hopefully, but I would really love it if the bank looked like this panel.
Thank you, Federico. Something really important that you mentioned is, and it's true, like we work for a diverse region, and it's expected that our talent to be as diverse as our region, so we can really respond effectively to our client need, right? And also something important, and I think is cutting edge, is for the first time including DEI into the risk topic, right? That is something very innovative, very different. So that's definitely a very innovative for the bank, and looking forward to your work in terms of reporting on this specific topic. So moving on, also, I would like to hear under the same topic question from Rocio, because Rocio, as you mentioned, you have been working in different countries, departments. You was recently, as you mentioned, you was country representative in Venezuela, in Trinidad and Tobago, now in Panama. And I think it's important, and you have a lot of share to us in terms of what do you think are the advantage of having a highly diverse representation in our organization?
Thank you. And yes, I would like to highlight, that experience in the country offices. I think one of the advantages for the bank as a group is to be close to the clients. And I think to be I'm very privileged to have and having right now a great teams and very diverse in terms, and I'm seeing now, as I mentioned earlier, in Panama, we are a group of almost 100 people, and very diverse in terms of age, skills, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. And I think to provide the good solutions for our clients, we need to have that such diversity and to because we cannot actually make a connection. I mean, it was mentioned before in terms of how we can relate. And I think one of the value added and differentiation for the bank is to have that kind of groups. And it's really proven in terms of diversity, a diverse environment will also attract a better talent, will promote innovation, will actually make everyone a very good and climate environment that everyone would like to be. And this will be very important now that we're trying to go hopefully see the light of this pandemic, and with all the recovery economy, we need to actually to work very hard. And as a country representative, I always try to push this agenda, not only at the office in terms of panels, recruitments. I mean, we have policies, and we were mentioning about that, but we need to implement it. Policies is not enough just to have it in paper, but you need to try to implement it, to put it in place. And also even in events when we are, I just remember a week ago, just having an invitation to be in a panel, and I see the other, how is the composition of all the other panelists, and when you don't see that balance, you keep asking, I mean, why is not diverse, why is it not gender balance, etc. So I think having this position, I'm very lucky to put it in place. And at work, actually, I want to mention one experience that working in Trinidad and Tobago in the country offices, that talking about the mentorship and seeing the advantages of that is we make an alliance with the AMSHA and TNT to put in place a mentorship program with them. We start as a pilot with a small group, and I know now I was in Trinidad and Tobago a little more than 3 years, and we make it grow and actually to enhance and to help women to be better leaders and to move in their own organizations. We start in the STEM, that is very hard, and we have less women working on this type of careers, and incrementing the type of experiences, and actually even improving and Federico mentioned that about the coaching, that the coaching type also very important in terms of the mentors and the style. So, and actually, and now that I'm in Panama and I saw the success of that, I'm trying to put it in place, and I'm starting discussions here to do the same thing in Panama. So I hope I will do that and still promoting these good experiences and practices.
Definitely looking forward. I think it's very important to replicate and expand best practices in our work, and not only in terms of the corporate side, but also expand programs like the mentorship programs to our projects that we're developing in the different CUF, right? And also something that you mentioned, very important, Rocio, and I like that you highlighted or you shared the experience from the managerial perspective, because something important is that from the leader, you need to promote and maintain diversity. Like, it needs to come from you. So you will be not only a workplace of choice, but also you will make your employees, your talent feel valuable and feel like they can be their self, right? And definitely, I think that's the way to go. And I'm looking forward, as I mentioned, to how you're going to expand the mentorship program in Panama. And my last question, but definitely not least, is for Ria. Like, as I mentioned before, Ria, you are the leading voice in terms of the DEI agenda within the IDB. And I would like to know your perspective as how the DEI efforts towards the region recovery is impacted by our representation in decision-making teams.
Well, before I start talking about that, because that's a really big topic, I think that part of the DEI journey is recognition. And so I really value this space as well to recognize the work of people like Rocio and people like Federico in the whole DEI journey. For Rocio, Rocio started that mentorship program with the American Chamber of Commerce in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is my home country. So of course I have a great love for this project, right? And I was a mentor in that project, and I thought it was tremendously not just innovative, but also it sort of communicated to the leaders in my own country that the IDB is an organization which is prepared to invest in the human capital of the country, which is part of the development journey as well, right? And then Federico, as you mentioned, Kayanna as well, this whole approach of seeing how diversity, equity, inclusion is a risk factor and can be a sort of a blind spot for organizations like the IDB. It's an innovative approach. It's a new approach. I don't know of any other organization who looks at DEI in particular as a risk factor. So, the conversations that I have had with Federico and his team have been also helped me to try to look to see how we can develop programs within the IDB group that sort of create a level playing field for everybody to feel that they are included and belong. So going back to the recovery effort and DEI agenda and how it fits, I have 2 points to make. So one point is about the fact that we have clients and they look at us and they look at how we treat with this topic and the composition of our own workforce, right? And that's what they want to emulate. Or that's what they think, well, if the IDB is doing it, then we should be doing it too. And they want to mainstream more the whole issue about DEI into the programs that they have nationally and locally, and also the work that they do with our organization, right? So when Federico said that the IDB should look like this panel, I support that completely, because this is the face of the region. This is the face of the people who are members of our great institution. So why not? This is what we should look like, right? So we want to be the standard bearers for our clients to see the diversity really does work, and it brings more innovation and productivity, as Rocio was saying. So that leads me to the next point, and something that I think my colleagues have been saying, in that the sense that the pandemic has been tremendously impactful for the region and on some communities more than others. For example, persons with disabilities have been a little bit impacted, perhaps more so. Women have been impacted more so. And in terms of my own region, the Caribbean, we depend on tourism. So tourism has been tremendously impacted. So the economic recovery for all of us is going to be hard. It's a steep uphill climb, right? So we as the IDB, we have a front seat space to help the region towards this economic recovery. It's not going to happen well if we have homogeneity in thinking. We need diversity in thinking to solve some of the really challenging problems that are being faced, which the region is being faced with right now. And that diversity in thinking is going to come from the other types of diversity, which are perhaps more visible diversities in terms of race, ethnicities, whatnot, and also some of the invisible dimensions of diversity, which are like persons with disabilities or people in the LGBTQ plus community. By having all of those people at the table, that's when we start to really see the magic happen in terms of being able to put our heads together and come up with innovative solutions that will help to resolve some of the most pressing and challenging issues that the region is facing right now. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Kayanna.
Thank you so much, Ria. And I think two things I would like to highlight from what you mentioned. One is that we need to walk the walk and talk the talk. And when you do that as an organization, we're going to be a trusted development partner, and also we're going to be the right partner to help in the recovery of Latin America and the Caribbean. And second is that we need to have diversity of thoughts, background, ethnicity, nationalities, because that will help us to really bring to the table different innovative and very impactful ideas to help us in the challenge that we have, right, after all the pandemic, and that we're still in process of recovery. So thank you for this perspective and highlighting the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization. So as promised, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we cover a few questions. So we have quite a few questions from the audience. So what I'm going to do is choose one per panelist, per guest, just to make sure that we give the opportunity to three of them to answer a question. So I'm going to start with Federico. So you say, I'm sure that you have been part of conversation that talk about male privilege and the ways in which this privilege can be leveraged to promote not just women, but looking at intersectionally Afro-descendant women, for example. What action will you recommend to male mentors to support?
I'm muted now. I'm going to go back to something I said at the beginning. First of all, male mentors should listen. I've been listening intently to Rocio and Ria, not just today, but throughout our mentorship sessions. I really wonder who was getting more value. I got enormous value from hearing your perspective, from your questions and so forth. I also want to go back to what I mentioned about my coaching at home. I think every white male should read, should go to Wesley University website, pull out Peggy McIntosh paper from 1988 entitled White Privilege and Male Privilege. This is a white woman who came up with 46 ways in which she was privileged without knowing it. It's an incredible exercise, hugely influential. And I think I should read this, and my wife forced me to read it. I'm hopefully the better for it. And then let me move to something you hinted at, Ria and Rocio, which is this ladder from coaching to mentoring to sponsoring. You will come across, any of us will come across openings, opportunities, windows, where you need to sit back and reflect on whether you actually know someone who is best placed for that window. And I just want to give a bit of self-disclosure here and sort of put it on the table for you to comment. 10 years ago, my boss left, and I was interested in the job, but a colleague of mine was also interested. So I called her up and I said, why don't we coach each other for the panel interviews? We had a couple of sessions, and of course she got the job and ended up becoming my boss. And I must say, she was the best boss I've ever had. Because she was great, probably also because of my attitude throughout the process. And I'm sure that every white male would do the same.
Thank you, Federico. Definitely, I think something important that you mentioned is listen. Just listen and find ways to better support women development. And I think that when you come and you're able to really set aside what your thoughts and what you believe, and just be there for them and support them and understand their backgrounds and what their needs, that's the key to becoming a great mentor and really supporting them in their development. So moving on to the second question, this one is for Rocio. As a country leader, you meet daily with authorities in Panama and advise on the value of mainstreaming DEI into development projects. What does it mean when you have the power, and how have you used your position to support other employees?
I mean, definitely. I mean, hearing just talk about Panama. I mean, we have been in a daily basis is part of our job how to push the agenda. And actually, in Panama, being a country where you have comarcas, indigenous population, you have Afro-Panamanians, and actually we have a very rich work that we're trying to put in place and help the government. So I think. I mean, as a country leader, I'm very fortunate to work together with the team and actually to bring it together, because that's important in terms of the diversity that I mentioned before, and to how to push the agenda. I mean, Panama is a country with large inequalities, and we actually focus in our recent country strategy we just approved last year is how we actually move the needle and work more beyond the rural areas, the comarcas. And actually I try to support the team in order to push that agenda. Not only the GDI specialist that works, but they also have to be mainstream. So that has to be part of the dialogue, and we try to push it in all our policy-based loan, in our programmatic, and in our investments. And the support that I see that working with them in the dialogue with the authorities at all levels, I think that makes a big importance. I mean, just to mention an example also for Afro-Panamanians, how we have been doing a very good job in training in terms of to empower them to push the public policy, and how this is important for them to actually push in the dialogue with the civil society, training civil society organizations, and actually even for art and creative industry, which actually we just launched last year an exposition of art with Africa, and the young leaders that we train, we're part of the volunteer group. So I mean, we have different type of examples that we put in place in the dialogue with the authorities, but also with the staff, with the work, and try to work on this to make a more diverse environment, not only for the bank, but also with the clients and with our work with the private and the public sector.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think it's really important create space for dialogue, right? Where you bring together authorities, the communities that you're going to work with, and the talent that's part of your staff, right? Of the organization, and just make sure and to include the DEI topic and agenda within the projects. And that will make us able to ensure that we are really taking into account the different communities that we work with. So that's something that is so important, and especially in our region that, as I mentioned, is so diverse. And the last question that we're going to receive for Ria, it says, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor, what are key pieces of advice you will give to an organization that is starting to build a framework that sets a sense of belonging as the center of their workplace environment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's so deep. So I guess that I would say that three first steps that an organization who is just starting to build a framework could take is, first of all, conduct that current state analysis. Understand where your organization is situated in the present moment in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second thing I would say is to listen, right? So to listen to all the voices within the organization, right? And especially if you have country offices, listen to the people in the field, because everybody, depending on their different identities, experiences DEI in a different way. And because of the intersections of identities, even though, for example, Rocio and I may share the fact that we are women, right? Our different identities mean that we experience the workplace in completely different ways, right? So listen to the voices of the various communities within the organization, and especially pay attention to issues of intersectionality, right? And the third thing I would say is look at what is happening around in the environment, right? Now, what I can say about DEI in terms of the broader environment of DEI is that DEI has really bubbled to the top because of events of 2020, right? Not saying it wasn't important before, but the events of 2020, especially in the US, have put a specific emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So pay attention to the things that are happening in the environment that are impacting or may impact your agenda. So those are just three things I wanted to mention, but there's so much more.
So thank you. I think this will definitely help those organizations that wants to implement DEI a DEI agenda in their companies, right, in their organization, and make sure that they're learning from best practices. And I think you're the best one to give advice on those, and definitely make sure that you have identified what is the current state of the organization, right? Make like a baseline, then listen to all the voices to make sure that you gather all the perspective, and it will be inclusive, and continuously monitor and pay attention on what's happening, and that will help you to continuously improve the agenda, right? So thank you for that, and thank you to all who shared their question. You know, because of time, we only take in 3, but thank you so much for taking your time to send your question in the chat. And before we close, I want just to end, I want to reassure that our commitment to honor the accomplishment and the legacy of our diverse community is not only this month. It's something that is a everyday action. It's that 365, 24/7 effort. And definitely we want to make this with the help of our employees, different resource and diversity groups, our allies, and all the different stakeholders that can help us boost our agenda of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also, I want to close this Inside the IDB by thanking Rocio, Federico, Ria, and all the amazing team that is behind this initiative. You are amazing. And finally, if you, like our speakers, are passionate and would like to support and work in terms of improving life in Latin America and the Caribbean, I want to remind you that we always have work opportunities here at the IDB group. So please go and visit our career site. We will add the link in the chat. And once again, thank you so much for joining, and stay tuned for future events. Have a good one.
Thank you, Kayanna.
Thank you.
And Rocio and Ria.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ria, Federico, Kayanna. Bye-bye.
Thank you.